May was the month of Escape the Readathon, and I aimed to read a lot of books in May. I aimed to challenge myself to read all of the books for the thrill seekers, and I started out the month really well, and as the month went on, I found myself in a pretty nasty reading slump and did not quite finish out the month as strong as I had hoped. However, I did manage to read some pretty solid books, and I actually managed to read a lot more than I thought I did. I read the same number of books as the books that I read in April, but I read some chunky boys this month. My longest book of the month came in at 1,026 pages, but like I had some really chunky books that weren't even that one, so I'm pretty proud of myself for still reading over 6,000 pages. I averaged a 3.5 star rating. I started 3 series. I read 7 indie books. I did not DNF any books, so that is always a win. As far as my breakdown, I read mostly audiobooks with a little mixture. 4 of mine were mixtures, and then 1 ebook and 1 physical book. Most of mine were 3 stars with a 4-star and a 5-star read, and then I read mostly romantasy with some fantasy and 1 sci-fi thrown in there. So a pretty solid month overall. So let's jump into what I thought of all of these books. The first book of the month that I read was Dark Age by Pierce Brown, and this is one that I'm reading for the Red Rising along with my patrons. We're finishing out the Red Rising series. This is the 5th book in the series, but the 2nd book in the 2nd arc of the series. Red Rising is following Darrow, who is one of the Reds, and they are helping to terraform Mars, but they are basically being suppressed by the Golds, who are the bigger, better, stronger, faster of the world. And there is a lot of politics in here. It is definitely sci-fi, but it has a fantasy-like undertone. I've really been enjoying this series so far. It's very fast-paced. However, this was probably my least favorite of the series so far. I did end up giving it a 3-star and was pretty disappointed in it overall. It was just boring for me. There was a point of view in here that I just don't like, and he spent a lot of time in this point of view. Darrow, who we do spend our entire first trilogy with, was not as much to be found. One of my favorite characters, Severo, was just really not in this as much, and I'm finding that these books to me are starting to get a little bit repetitive, where we start the book and we have this big thing that we're supposed to do and we fight it out, and then we spend the whole book just kind of talking about the politics around it, but then we fight it out again, and I'm wanting there to be a little bit more nuance to things, and I know that people will probably disagree with me and say that these are one of the most nuanced books that they've ever read, but I do find that I just want there to be a little bit more, I guess, variation in the pacing of the book, I think is a better way to say it than nuanced. There's a lot of action in here, but I feel like we're like high action, low dips, high action, low dips, and I am not a super long high action person. I tend to find that I get very bored in long action scenes, and that was happening in here. We had 150 pages of an action scene, and I just zoned out. And so even though there were important things happening during that action scene, I was not as invested because I was bored by the action overall, and just that's me in battle scenes in general. It doesn't have to be space opera, that's me in battle scenes, period. So I think it was just this particular book did not work as well for me. I am excited to continue on. I will be reading Lightbringer, so I absolutely plan to finish out the series, but unfortunately this one just did not work for me as well as the rest. Next up we had a novella, which is Powerful by Lauren Roberts. This is the in-between that comes after Powerless, and it follows her friend Adina, who is the seamstress. I will say that I think you need to read Powerless before you go into Powerful, because this will spoil the ending of Powerless. You know exactly what is going to happen in this going in if you have read Powerless, so I guess you can kind of pick and choose, but I strongly recommend that you read Powerless before going into this one. This is more of a reluctant ally / friends to lovers, in my opinion. There's not quite as much banter in this one as there is in Powerless. I liked this, but I didn't love it quite as much just because I live for banter. I live for knife to the throat and sniping at one another, and this just didn't have as much of that. They were definitely a sweeter couple, and that just falls into the nature of who Adina is as a person, which is not a bad thing, but it just did not appeal to me quite as much as a reader. The ending is still gut-wrenching. The ending is still very sad, but at the same time, I did already know how it was going to end, so it didn't have, I guess, quite as big of an impact on me because we had already seen it in Powerless, but I still enjoyed this one. I ended up giving it a lower 4-star. I think that it's a good book, but it's not absolutely necessary to the story of Powerless overall. It's very hard to remember which one's powerful and which one's powerless. Next up, I read The Tainted Cup by Robert Jackson Bennett. I read this with my patrons. It was part of our buddy read. We then did a live show and all discussed it on a Google Meet with one another. I think that that really helped me kind of frame my opinions around this and hear how everybody else felt about it. This is a murder mystery fantasy where we have Din, who is the assistant to Anna, who is an investigator, and he is a magically altered, which makes him the perfect assistant for her. He is sent in order to investigate one of the new murderers. It's very Watson Holmes-esque. People definitely felt like they saw the Agatha Christie more in this, in the way that the murder mystery was set up. I think that Anna and Din's relationship is very Watson Holmes, but the murder mystery itself is definitely more Agatha Christie. This is definitely not for those that are looking for a high action fantasy book. It is definitely more of a slow moving mystery with fantasy elements woven into it. And I think for me, it was just a little slower. I wanted a little bit more world building than I felt like was actually there. There was a lot of just kind of wandering around, talking to one another. Din would travel to somewhere, he would meet someone, he would learn what he would need to know, and then he would leave and he would relay that to Anna. And then he would go somewhere else, he would learn what he would need to know, he would investigate something, and he would travel back and he would relay that to Anna. And so I just found myself to be a little bit bored by that. However, I really, really liked their dynamic. I thought that that was a lot of fun. Anna was so snipey and funny, and I thought that she really stole the show. I am very much so in the minority on this book. People love it. And so there was something in it that was missing for me, and I wish that I could just fully put my finger on it, but I'm definitely in the minority on this one. I will be continuing in this series, and I think that for me, I may reread this and reread it physically. I think that the audio is really well done, but I think that that may have been contributing a little bit to the too even keel, kind of making me a little more bored. So I will potentially reread this physically. Next up, I read Deathless by Rob J. Hayes. This is the first book in the middle trilogy of trilogies, and it is following an older main character who is a king, and he is slowly dying, but he is trying to fight off the angels who are wanting him to rule his kingdom a certain way. This one is a shorter book, around 200 pages, and while I was very bored in the beginning of the story and felt like not a whole lot was happening, I really liked the ending and the way that it is tying into the rest of the trilogies. So Rob J. Hayes wrote the first book in 3 different trilogies that span 3,000 years and then put them all out on a Kickstarter, which you guys will be starting to get at the end of June, 1st of July, I believe. That may have been pushed back a little bit more, but I am really loving the way that all of these are tying together, and I think that them tying together is really enhancing my enjoyment quite a lot. And so this one ended up getting a 3-star. I think that the tie-in really worked for me, but I think that overall I just wish that there had been a little bit more going on throughout the rest of the story, but I did really appreciate that there was an older main character. Sorry if there was a slight angle change, my camera battery decided to die. Okay, moving on to the next book, we have A Kingdom This Cursed and Empty. I also read A Crown This Cold and Heavy, which is the 3rd book in the series. I am loving reading this series. This is just such a fun fantasy romance series. Both of these did get 4 stars. I think that I enjoyed the 2nd book in the series a little bit more than the 3rd book in the series. The 3rd book, like every single book, has expanded the world a little bit more, but I feel like pulled away from the romance a little bit more, and I just want to go back into the romance. This is following Priska, who is one of the corrupted. In this world, you are required to give up your magic as a baby, and if you do not, then you are considered one of the corrupted, and if you are found out, you are burned. She is one day found out that she still has magic, and she is running away when she meets a man that has been haunting her dreams, when he tells her that he will help her learn how to control her magic if she will help him sneak into the kingdom. There's a lot more going on from there. There are fae, there's time magic, and it's just a lot of fun. These books have some really fun cliffhangers. It is now a completed series, so if you are looking for a fantasy romance that you can just binge from start to finish, a full audio set, then this is definitely one for you. I cannot wait to complete the series. I've just been waiting for the perfect moment to dive back in and to finish everything falling off, but I have been loving this. I liked both book 2 and book 3 and would highly recommend this entire series. It is definitely an enemies to lovers, but leans a little bit more away from the enemies, more toward reluctant allies as you go along, which I feel like is a pretty common thing in fantasy romance, and it definitely has an extensive world and a good plot. It is fast-paced, so if any of those sound like buzzwords for you, I definitely recommend that you pick this series up. Next up, we're going to talk about 2 more at the same time. This was my month of just completing fantasy romance series. That is Glow of the Everflame, which you guys saw me vlog, and Heat of the Everflame, which you did not. So quickly we will talk about Glow, which got a 4.5 star, which feels more like a 5-star now in hindsight. I loved this one. This is the second book in the Spark of the Everflame series, the Kindred's Curse saga, who is following Diem. She is always been a little bit different, and in this world we have Descended, who are basically the demigods. They were given powers by the Kindred, who gave up their immortality so that they could love a human. And the Descended really kind of look down on humans. They kind of leave them to live in squalor while they live up in their palace. And Diem is helping her mother as a healer. She's been told that she cannot go anywhere near the Descended, but when her mother turns up missing, she's required to take up her mother's role and goes to be the healer of the castle and ends up meeting one of the Descended, and things kind of go from there. This has a revolution rebellion plotline in it, lots of magic, reluctant allies, enemies to lovers romance. It's just so good and so much fun and so addicting. I liked Spark, but I loved Glow and really enjoyed Heat as well. I feel like Heat really amps up the ante a lot. It is a little bit too long, but at the same time, there's just so much going on. It ends on a massive cliffhanger, and I cannot wait for Burn to come out. This one got a 5-star from me, even though it was a little bit too long. I just ate up every second of it. I had so much fun. This is the new fantasy romance series for everyone to pick up, pick it up, pick it up, pick it up. It is so good. Pick it up. Then we have one that unfortunately did not work for me, and that is Five Broken Blades by Maya Coraland, I believe is how you say that. This is a Red Tower release, and it is just absolutely gorgeous, and I wanted to love this so much. I was hoping it would have a lot of like Asian inspired fantasy and culture, and would be like a sweeping fantasy, and would have a little dash of romance with lots of points of view. And unfortunately, that was sort of true, but the execution just really did not work for me. I have already ranted about this in my Getting Up at 5 a.m. vlog. Very Sleepy Mel gave you a full rant review of this. It's following 5 different points of view, and they are all like basically thieves and poisoners and assassins, and they are being set out to go on this job to kill the king. And the king is thought to be immortal, but really there is a crown that he wears that makes him immortal, and once you remove that crown, he is no longer immortal. He can be killed. But unfortunately, this just did not, the execution just did not work for me. There were so many things. Basically, I was bored. There was just everyone was just horny all the time. There was not a lot going on. The writing and the characters just felt very childish to me. It did not work for me at all. I think that again, the idea was really good. I think that it could have been a great book, and that's why it makes me so annoyed, is because this could have been amazing. The potential was there. We have one point of view in this. What is her name? Sora? She is basically like this poisons master, and I could have read a whole book on her. She saved the book for me, and that's why this book got a 2-star, is because I really enjoyed her character. She was fascinating to me. She like grew up and was treated with all of these poisons so that she could become immune to them and kill others with them on her body. I thought that she was really cool, but the rest of the characters just were flat. They had no depth to them, and like I said, they were more worried about getting in one another's pants than they were actually doing anything to move the story forward. And then when we ended the story, the setup for book 2 sounds exactly like book 1. So I don't know that I will actually be continuing in this. I just was really hoping for something more from this, and yeah, I'm done ranting about it. I'm disappointed. Okay, moving on to Lady of Embers by Melissa K. O'Rourke. This is book 4 in the Lady of Darkness series. This is following Scarlet, who is one of the Maidens of Death. She is an assassin, and she is infiltrating the castle not only to kill her next mark, but to try to figure out what is going on with these missing children. There are fae and a lot of other creatures in here. This is a knife to the throat, enemies to lovers / reluctant allies romance. It is has definitely got an epic fantasy plotline to it, so if you are somebody that wants your romantasy to end up having a sprawling epic fantasy plotline, then this may work really, really well for you. I find that it feels like Throne of Glass, but make it for adults, and I really enjoy it. This book, unfortunately, I think fell that I waited too long to read it, so it ended up getting a lower 4-star from me. It just feels a little bit repetitive. I feel like we're doing the same things over and over again. We're having the same arguments between our two love interests over and over and over again, and I'm like, okay, but we've already had that conflict. Can we find a new one? And so I think that for me, I should have just binged this series, because I think that that all would be a lot less noticeable if I was still in it, because originally I was just by the throat. This series had me in a chokehold. I was loving the characters. I was loving just being in their heads and living things with them. And I think if I had continued this series back to back to back, I wouldn't be noticing some of this stuff. But at the same time, unfortunately, now that I am not, I am noticing it be a little bit more repetitive and drag a lot more. These books are very, very long. This particular one is 625 pages. And so they're just too long and too drug out. But at the same time, I did still give this a 4-star. I do still have a lot of fun with this series, and I would still absolutely recommend it. This did recently get picked up by a publisher in the UK, and I anticipate the US is probably soon to follow, so you guys should absolutely pick this series up and give it a try. Last but not least, we have Lord of Gold and Glory by Lisette Marshall. This is book 2 to A Court of Blood and Bindings, which I gave 5 stars earlier this year, and unfortunately, Lord of Gold and Glory is going to be getting a 3-star from me, which I am so incredibly sad about. I wanted to love this book. I was expecting it to be another 5-star. I realized that A Court of Blood and Bindings is not the best written literature. It was definitely right book, right moment, and it's definitely more fun than, like, there are plot holes out the wazoo. So many things that don't make sense, and I read them and I recognized them and I promptly ignored them because I was having fun. However, in this one, I don't necessarily think that there were as many plot holes that I was noticing, but good grief was I bored. We were just dragging the plot along in this, and it was just moving at a snail's pace. Let me back up and tell you that A Court of Blood and Bindings is following Evie, I believe? Emmy. She has magic, but she is not allowed to use it. She lives in the world of the humans, and they really aren't supposed to have magic. When one day she sees the Silent Death, and she runs to tell her father that he is there. He doesn't believe her, and the Silent Death is thought to have killed everyone and wiped out her village and kidnaps her. But there is a lot more to that story. There's a lot more to the Silent Death than she thought, and she gets swept into the world of the Fae and the Fae court. This has color magic in it, so you're able to take colors and they are using different things. So like blue can heal, yellow can change colors, red is for destruction, and you pull it from things, so like clothing or objects. So I really love that part of the story, but unfortunately the two main characters, our love interest, were separated for over half of the story. It was a lot more of like a sweet, they're together romance, and so the banter was missing. It tried to be like this epic fantasy, but was just not doing that very well, and unfortunately I just did not love book 2. I will continue on in the series, but will I be in any hurry? Unfortunately, no. So we will see how that ends up going, but I'm just so disappointed that book 2 did not work for me because I had such high expectations after reading this one. I was just expecting a fun fantasy romance, and unfortunately I think it was trying too hard to be like a serious fantasy and missed the mark for me. Okay guys, so those are all of the books that I read in the month of May. I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know what your favorite book of the month of May was down in the comments below. If you just want to let me know that you were here and hanging out, leave me a snake emoji for Dark Age. As always, links to my Patreon, Instagram, Twitter, and Goodreads are all in the description box below. Please give this video a big thumbs up if you liked it and subscribe if you want to, and I will see you guys next time. Bye!